You don't get to touch company money looking like that." The words sliced through the polished silence of the private banking lounge just after 9:10 on a bright Tuesday morning in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, and every conversation within earshot came to an abrupt stop. Heads turned. Coffee cups paused halfway to waiting lips. The marble floors, the quiet piano music, and the polished brass fixtures suddenly felt colder, as though the entire room had been holding its breath without realizing it. Angela Brooks stood beside the reception desk wearing dark jeans, comfortable flats, and a simple navy sweater. There were no designer logos, no jewelry meant to impress strangers, and no entourage announcing her arrival. She carried only a slim leather portfolio and the calm expression of someone who had learned years ago that dignity never needed an audience. She had politely requested a scheduled withdrawal from a corporate account, nothing more and nothing less. Richard Collins, the branch manager, looked at her identification for only a second before setting it back on the counter with obvious doubt written across his face. His smile disappeared, replaced by the practiced confidence of a man who believed appearances always told the truth. "That amount isn't for people who walk and dress like this," he said loudly enough for nearby clients to hear. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A financial advisor lowered his tablet. A retired couple quietly stopped whispering. No one spoke. Angela remained perfectly still. She had seen this look before. Not once. Not twice. More times than she cared to remember. It was the look that questioned her presence before questioning the facts. She answered in an even voice. "Please verify my information." Richard laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to invite agreement from everyone nearby. "There's nothing to verify until I know who you really are." A younger teller named Emily Carter glanced toward her monitor, then toward Angela, uncertainty briefly crossing her face before she looked back down. Something about the customer's name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Richard stepped closer, determined to control the room. "I'm denying this transaction until further notice." Angela neither argued nor raised her voice. She simply met his eyes with remarkable composure. That calm seemed to frustrate him even more. In an impulsive display of disrespect, he made dismissive physical contact intended to hurry her away from the counter, shocking everyone who witnessed the moment. A quiet gasp rippled across the lounge. An elderly veteran slowly stood from his chair. A woman waiting to sign mortgage papers covered her mouth in disbelief. Even Emily froze with her hands above her keyboard. Angela did not react with anger. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply adjusted her portfolio, looked directly at Richard, and said, "Is this how you treat every client before checking the facts?" Richard folded his arms, convinced he had already won. "People like you always have a story." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Across the room, security looked toward the reception desk, waiting for instructions they did not yet understand. Emily quietly opened another screen on her computer, her heartbeat quickening as the customer profile began loading. Something unexpected was about to appear, though she didn't know it yet. Angela calmly reached into her pocket, unlocked her phone, and rested her thumb over a familiar contact without dialing. Around her, the elegant bank no longer felt like a place of business. It felt like a courtroom moments before the truth entered the record. Angela Brooks never dressed to impress strangers because she had spent 20 years learning that real authority did not depend on expensive fabrics or recognizable logos. Every decision she made that morning had been deliberate, from the plain navy sweater she pulled from her closet to the modest sedan she drove herself through Charlotte traffic without a driver or security team. She wanted to see her newest acquisition exactly as ordinary customers experienced it. 6 months earlier, Brooks Capital Holdings had quietly completed the majority purchase of Heritage National Bank after a lengthy negotiation that attracted almost no public attention outside the financial press. Since then, quarterly reports had looked exceptional. Customer satisfaction numbers appeared strong. Internal compliance audits showed nothing alarming. Yet anonymous letters continued arriving at her office, each describing nearly the same pattern. Clients claimed they had been judged before they were served. Some believed they were ignored because of their appearance. Others felt they were treated differently after employees made assumptions about their background. None of the complaints contained enough evidence to justify immediate disciplinary action, but together they painted a picture that refused to leave Angela's mind. Instead of announcing another executive inspection, she created a simple plan. Visit several branches alone. Wear ordinary clothes. Ask for routine financial services. Watch what happened before anyone recognized her. She believed culture revealed itself when people thought no one important was watching. At the reception desk, Richard Collins still wore the confident expression of a man certain his instincts could never be questioned. He quietly instructed another employee to delay all paperwork connected to Angela's request until further notice. Two wealth management clients seated nearby exchanged uneasy looks. Neither one seemed interested in returning to their financial magazines anymore. Emily Carter, meanwhile, continued searching the customer database, her fingers moving carefully across the keyboard. The profile loading on her monitor contained unusually high authorization restrictions, but before she could open the complete record, an internal permission notice blocked her access. She frowned. Standard business accounts never required executive clearance. Angela noticed the young teller's expression but said nothing. She had learned that people often revealed their character long before they spoke. Across the lounge, a middle-aged businessman quietly approached another banker and whispered, "She has stayed calmer than anyone else in this room." His companion nodded without taking his eyes off the unfolding situation. Richard mistook the silence surrounding him for support. "You are free to leave," he said firmly. "This transaction is finished." Angela answered with the same measured tone she had used from the beginning. "No, the transaction has not even started because you have not verified a single fact." Richard folded his arms again. "I know enough." Angela looked around the elegant lounge, noticing polished marble columns reflecting the morning sunlight through towering windows. Years earlier, she had imagined places like this represented opportunity. At 24, after closing her first successful commercial real estate deal, she had entered another bank carrying legitimate earnings and limitless ambition. A manager there questioned whether the funds actually belonged to her before eventually approving the deposit without apology. She remembered leaving that building promising herself one thing: if she ever gained enough influence to change financial institutions from the inside, she would never allow assumptions to replace integrity. Standing inside Heritage National, that promise echoed louder than ever. She slowly unlocked her phone and opened a secure contact labeled Melissa Grant. She still did not press the call button. Not yet. First, she wanted to see whether anyone inside the branch would choose professionalism before authority forced them to. Richard Collins sensed the attention shifting away from him, and instead of slowing down, he doubled down. "Security will escort you out if necessary," he announced, his voice carrying across the private banking lounge with the confidence of someone convinced that authority alone created truth. Two uniformed security officers near the entrance exchanged uncertain glances before walking toward the reception area. Neither of them appeared eager to intervene. They had witnessed the entire exchange from a distance, and what they had seen was not a disruptive customer, but a composed woman asking for verification. Angela Brooks remained exactly where she was, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. "I am requesting a lawful transaction," she said calmly. "Nothing more." Richard shook his head. "You are refusing to cooperate." "No," Angela replied. "I am asking you to follow your own procedures." The distinction was obvious to everyone except the man determined not to hear it. Emily Carter continued working quietly behind her monitor. She attempted another search using a different internal pathway reserved for executive banking relationships. This time, a restricted profile flashed onto her screen for less than 2 seconds before disappearing behind another authorization notice. She only caught a glimpse of several words before they vanished, but those words made her heart race. Executive, ownership, confidential. She blinked twice, wondering if she had misread them. Heritage National had very few executive ownership accounts, and access to those files was limited to senior leadership. Emily looked toward Angela again. The woman standing across the marble counter showed none of the nervousness usually associated with customers facing confrontation. Instead, she looked almost disappointed, as though she had hoped for something better from the people around her. Across the lounge, an older gentleman wearing a tailored gray suit slowly stood from his leather chair. He had spent more than 30 years operating manufacturing companies across North Carolina, and experience had taught him that confidence often sounded quieter than arrogance. "Manager Collins," he said respectfully. Perhaps you should simply verify her information before escalating this any further. Richard barely acknowledged him. Sir, this does not concern you. The businessman frowned. It concerns every client watching how this bank treats people. A murmur spread through the room. Another customer nodded in agreement. A young financial planner lowered the folder in his hands, no longer pretending to work. Even one of the security officers shifted his weight uneasily, clearly questioning whether he should be standing where he was. Richard interpreted their silence as hesitation rather than concern. He instructed an assistant to place a temporary hold on Angela's transaction request pending further investigation. The assistant hesitated before reluctantly entering the instruction into the system. Angela watched every movement without interruption. Years of leading billion-dollar negotiations had taught her that people under pressure often revealed more than they intended. She did not need Richard to confess bias. His decisions were documenting it one step at a time. Emily tried one final search, this time using the identification number from Angela's driver's license instead of the account number. The screen loaded for several seconds before another warning appeared. Executive authorization required. Contact corporate administration. Emily's breathing became shallow. Ordinary clients did not generate messages like that. She quietly printed the notification before anyone noticed and slipped the paper beneath a folder on her desk. Something inside her told her the branch was heading toward a mistake that could not be undone. Angela glanced at the phone resting in her hand. Melissa Grant's name remained open on the secure contact list, waiting for a single touch. Around her, the polished lobby still looked elegant, but beneath its calm exterior, the foundation of the entire branch had already begun to crack, even though almost no one inside realized it yet. Emily Carter stared at the printed authorization notice hidden beneath the edge of her keyboard, as if it might disappear if she looked away for too long. During her 3 years at Heritage National Bank, she had never seen a customer profile protected at that level. Executive authorization was reserved for a handful of individuals whose accounts carried ownership privileges or board-level access. She quietly compared the customer identification number on the printout with the one displayed on Angela Brooks's driver's license. They matched perfectly. A chill ran through her. She looked toward Richard Collins, who was now speaking confidently with the two security officers as though the outcome had already been decided. Please remain available, he told them. We may need assistance escorting this customer from the private lounge. Neither officer answered immediately. One finally asked, Has her identity been verified? Richard dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. I have seen enough. Emily could not stay silent any longer. Manager Collins, she said carefully, hoping not to embarrass him in front of the clients. I think we should verify the account before making any additional decisions. Richard turned sharply toward her. You are a teller, Emily. Leave management decisions to management. The room grew even quieter. Angela watched the exchange without interruption, her expression unchanged. She noticed the hesitation in Emily's voice and the sincerity behind it. The young employee was not defending a stranger. She was defending the process. That difference mattered. Across the lounge, the older businessman who had spoken earlier stepped closer to the reception desk. Young lady, he said to Emily, did you find something? Emily hesitated. Bank policy prevented her from discussing confidential records. Yet every instinct told her the situation was moving in the wrong direction. She answered carefully, I found enough to believe this deserves proper verification. Richard let out an impatient sigh. There is nothing to verify. This woman cannot simply walk into a private banking lounge and expect us to release a large withdrawal without asking questions. Angela finally spoke again, her voice steady and unmistakably calm. No one objected to asking questions. I objected to answering assumptions instead of questions. Those words settled over the room with surprising weight. Several clients slowly nodded. A woman waiting to finalize a home equity loan quietly whispered to her husband, She has been respectful the entire time. Even one of the security officers lowered his hands from his duty belt, visibly less convinced that his presence was necessary. Emily gathered the courage to take one more step. She walked around her station carrying only the folded authorization notice in her hand. Stopping a respectful distance from Richard, she spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. Sir, corporate administration is listed as the required contact for this account. We should call before taking any further action. Richard barely glanced at the paper before pushing it back toward her. You are overreacting. Emily looked at Angela, then back at the document. I do not think I am. Angela offered the slightest nod of appreciation, nothing more. She understood exactly how difficult that moment had been for a junior employee challenging her own manager in front of clients. Character often revealed itself in quiet decisions, not dramatic speeches. The atmosphere inside the elegant branch had completely changed. Customers were no longer watching a disagreement over a banking transaction. They were watching a test of integrity. Angela lowered her eyes to the phone resting in her hand. Her thumb hovered over Melissa Grant's name for one silent second before pressing the screen. The call connected almost instantly, and without raising her voice, she said, Melissa, it is time to begin Protocol 7. Please notify corporate administration that the branch has completed its own evaluation. Now it is our turn. Melissa Grant did not waste a single second. Understood, she replied in the same calm, professional tone Angela had heard through countless acquisitions and board meetings. Protocol 7 is now active. Corporate administration, internal compliance, executive legal, and the ethics review office are being notified. Please remain where you are. Angela ended the call without another word and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Richard Collins smirked as though he had just watched an amateur performance. Calling a lawyer is not going to change anything, he said. Angela met his gaze. I did not call a lawyer. His smile remained, but it no longer looked as certain as it had moments before. Emily Carter quietly returned to her workstation, unable to ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside her chest. Every instinct told her the branch had crossed a line long before the phone call. She looked around the lounge. Clients who had arrived expecting an ordinary banking appointment now watched every movement with complete attention. Nobody returned to their paperwork. Nobody resumed their conversations. Even the soft, instrumental music drifting through the speakers seemed strangely distant. Angela stood in perfect silence, and for a brief moment another memory found her. She remembered being 24 years old, standing inside a different bank with the first meaningful profits she had ever earned from commercial real estate. She had spent months negotiating contracts, sleeping only a few hours each night, believing success would finally speak louder than assumptions. Instead, the manager studying her deposit had questioned whether the funds truly belonged to her. The paperwork had eventually proven everything, but no document had ever erased the feeling of being judged before she was known. Walking out of that building, she had promised herself she would never confuse wealth with dignity. Money could buy buildings, companies, and opportunities, but character had to exist before any of those things arrived. That promise had guided every decision she made since then, including the one that brought her into Heritage National Bank that morning. Richard interrupted the silence by instructing another employee to prepare an incident report describing Angela as an uncooperative customer whose transaction presented unusual concerns. The assistant hesitated while typing, clearly uncomfortable with the wording. Should I include that her identification appears valid? She asked quietly. Richard answered without looking at the screen. Write what I instructed. The assistant reluctantly continued typing, but several clients exchanged troubled glances after hearing the exchange. The older businessman who had defended Angela earlier slowly removed his glasses and folded them in his hands. Young man, he said toward Richard, facts should never be adjusted to fit conclusions. Richard forced a polite smile. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this branch follows established procedures. The businessman replied calmly. Good procedures begin with verification, not assumptions. One of the security officers nodded almost imperceptibly. Emily noticed it. So did Angela. The room was changing, not because anyone suddenly knew who she was, but because people were beginning to recognize the difference between authority and fairness. At that exact moment, Emily's computer emitted a soft notification chime. A bright banner appeared across the top of her monitor. Executive communication pending. Corporate administration requesting immediate branch status. Her eyes widened. That notification bypassed every normal reporting channel. She looked toward Richard, who had not yet noticed it, then back at Angela, whose calm expression never changed. Somewhere many miles away from the polished marble floor of the Charlotte branch, an entire corporate system had begun moving with quiet precision, and everyone inside the lounge was only seconds away from discovering that the most powerful person in the room had never once needed to raise her voice. The notification spread through the branch faster than any spoken rumor ever could. Emily Carter watched the secure message expand across her monitor until it filled the top of the screen in bright blue letters. Executive communication active. Maintain current records. Do not alter transaction history. Preserve all internal logs. She had never seen an instruction like it before. Her pulse quickened as another message immediately followed. Corporate administration had opened a live compliance review connected directly to the Charlotte branch. Emily slowly looked toward Richard Collins, wondering whether he had received the same alert. He had not. He was too busy reassuring himself that the situation remained under his control. "This will all be over in a few minutes," he announced confidently to the customers watching from the lounge. "We simply have to protect the bank." Angela Brooks answered with the same measured calm she had maintained since walking through the front doors. "A bank protects trust before anything else." Richard smiled politely, missing the weight behind her words. "Trust has to be earned." Angela nodded once. "Exactly." Across town, inside Brooks Capital Holdings headquarters, Melissa Grant stood inside the Executive Operations Center surrounded by legal counsel, compliance specialists, and senior administrators. Multiple screens displayed live records from Heritage National Bank, transaction histories, internal communications, employee authorization logs. Melissa spoke clearly to the assembled team. Protocol 7 has confirmed direct observation. Executive ethics is monitoring. Preserve every communication from the Charlotte branch beginning at 9 o'clock this morning. No, records are to be modified. One attorney quietly replied, "Understood." Board representatives have joined the review. Back inside the branch, another notification sounded. This time it reached Richard's workstation. He glanced at the screen with mild irritation before opening the secure message. Corporate administration requests immediate status update regarding executive account verification. Richard frowned. Executive account? He looked back toward Angela, then dismissed the thought almost immediately. Probably a system error, he muttered. Emily heard him and felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had already seen enough to know the system was behaving exactly as designed. One of the security officers stepped closer to Richard and spoke quietly. "Sir, perhaps we should pause until corporate responds." Richard shook his head. "There is nothing to pause." The older businessman folded his newspaper and smiled faintly. Sometimes the hardest thing for a leader is recognizing the moment to stop talking and start listening. Several customers quietly agreed. The atmosphere inside the lounge had shifted completely. Nobody viewed Angela as the problem anymore. They were watching how the institution responded when its own procedures challenged the assumptions of someone in charge. Angela remained perfectly composed. She had spent decades building companies through discipline rather than emotion, and she knew that lasting accountability never arrived through arguments. It arrived through facts. Her phone vibrated once. Melissa's message appeared on the secure screen. Executive review complete. Board confirmation in progress. Arrival estimated in less than 5 minutes. Angela read the message, locked the screen, and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply looked around the elegant lounge one more time, noticing the anxious faces of employees, the thoughtful expressions of customers, and Emily standing quietly beside her workstation with integrity written across her face. Richard finally noticed that nearly every conversation in the room had stopped. Every pair of eyes rested on him instead of the woman he had tried so hard to dismiss. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crept into his expression. He still believed he was defending the bank, but the bank itself was already moving toward him, and within moments the truth would no longer require anyone's permission to enter the room. The silence inside the private banking lounge was broken by a soft electronic tone that echoed from nearly every employee workstation at the same time. Computer screens refreshed automatically. Emily Carter looked at her monitor first, and her breath caught. The restricted customer profile she had struggled to access moments earlier was now fully visible without limitation. Across the top of the screen, highlighted in bold blue letters, appeared Executive Ownership Account. Beneath it was a name she would never forget. Angela Brooks, Chairwoman and Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Holdings. Principal owner representative, Heritage National Bank. Emily slowly looked up from the monitor toward Angela, then back to the screen, making certain she had not imagined what she was reading. At Richard Collins's desk, another alert appeared before he could close the previous message. Mandatory executive verification. Corporate administration requests immediate acknowledgement. He clicked the notification impatiently, expecting another routine instruction. Instead, his expression changed almost instantly. The color drained from his face as the same executive profile appeared on his monitor, accompanied by an official photograph identical to the woman standing only a few feet away. He stared at the screen, then at Angela, then back again. For several long seconds, he said nothing. The older businessman quietly removed his glasses once more and folded his hands. The security officers exchanged confused looks before one of them glanced toward Richard's monitor and froze. Emily stepped away from her workstation without speaking. She no longer needed to guess. The system itself had answered every question. Angela remained exactly where she had stood since entering the branch. Calm, unshaken, patient. She watched Richard struggle to process what had been in front of him all morning. Finally, his voice emerged, quieter than anyone had heard it all day. This cannot be right. Angela answered gently. The system never questioned who I was. Only people did. No one moved. Even the music playing through the ceiling speakers seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those words. Another secure notification appeared across every management terminal in the branch. Executive Board Review active. Preserve all records. Await further instructions. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the keyboard, searching for some explanation that would restore the certainty he had carried only minutes earlier. There was none. Every authorization level confirmed the same identity. Every internal record matched. Every safeguard recognized Angela Brooks immediately. The only failure had been human judgment. Melissa Grant's voice came through Angela's phone on speaker with calm professionalism. Good morning, Ms. Brooks. Corporate administration confirms your identity. Members of the board and executive ethics committee are now connected. They have reviewed the transaction logs, employee communications, and branch activity beginning at 9 o'clock this morning. Angela thanked her quietly before lifting her eyes toward Richard. There was no anger in her expression, only disappointment. You believed my appearance told you everything you needed to know, she said. You never allowed the facts to introduce me. Richard opened his mouth, but no words followed. Around the lounge, clients who had watched the entire encounter slowly understood the full truth. They had not witnessed an ordinary disagreement over a withdrawal. They had witnessed the leader of the institution standing patiently while her own branch revealed its culture without realizing who was watching. Angela's voice remained calm as she spoke one final sentence that settled over the room like a final verdict. You did not fail because you questioned a transaction. You failed because you decided my worth before you verified my identity, and the woman you dismissed this morning is the person ultimately responsible for the standards of this bank. Richard Collins stared at the monitor as another secure notification appeared before him. Access privileges suspended pending executive ethics review. The branch management dashboard he had opened hundreds of times instantly disappeared, replaced by a message instructing him not to perform any further administrative actions. He instinctively reached for the keyboard again, but every command returned the same response. Authorization denied. Across the room, similar alerts appeared on the workstation used by the assistant who had entered the incident report. Her access remained active, but the report itself had been locked to preserve its original wording. No edits. No deletions. No revisions. Every decision made that morning had become part of an official record. Melissa Grant's voice remained steady through the speakerphone. Ms. Brooks, Executive Ethics has completed its preliminary review. All transaction logs, internal messages, workstation activity, and security records have been preserved. The board has authorized immediate administrative action pending a formal investigation. Angela acknowledged her with a quiet, "Thank you, Melissa." She did not celebrate. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood with the same composure she had carried into the branch. Two senior regional executives entered through the front doors moments later, accompanied by the regional director of human resources. Their arrival transformed the atmosphere more completely than any dramatic confrontation ever could. Employees stepped aside without being asked. Customers instinctively made room. The regional director approached Angela first. Ms. Brooks, on behalf of Heritage National Bank, I sincerely apologize for what occurred this morning. We will address every action according to company policy. Angela nodded politely. The policy already exists. Today simply revealed whether it was being followed. Those words landed with remarkable force. The older businessman quietly smiled. That is what leadership sounds like, he said to no one in particular. Emily Carter lowered her eyes for a moment, relieved that someone had finally spoken with honesty instead of authority. One of the regional executives turned toward Richard Collins. Your administrative authority is suspended effective immediately while executive ethics completes its review. Please cooperate fully with human resources. Richard looked around the lounge as though searching for someone to tell him the situation could still be explained away. Instead, he found only quiet faces reflecting disappointment rather than anger. The certainty that had defined his morning had completely vanished. He spoke softly, almost to himself. I thought I was protecting the bank. Angela answered before anyone else could. You protect a bank by protecting its principles. Those principles belong to every customer before they belong to any manager. No one argued. Even the security officers stood silently, recognizing that the greatest lesson of the morning had nothing to do with financial procedures. It was about judgment. The regional director then turned toward Emily. Ms. Carter, corporate administration has already reviewed your actions. Thank you for insisting on proper verification and for preserving the system records. Emily looked genuinely surprised. I only followed the process. Angela smiled for the first time that morning. Exactly. Integrity often looks ordinary while it is happening. Around the lounge, several customers quietly applauded. It was not loud or theatrical. It was the natural response of people who had witnessed fairness finally catch up with assumption. The elegant branch looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, with polished marble floors, soft lighting, and carefully arranged furniture. Yet everything had changed. Policies had not changed. Systems had not changed. Only the truth had become impossible to ignore. As the regional director began speaking privately with human resources, Angela calmly collected her leather portfolio and waited with patient confidence, knowing that real accountability never depended on revenge. It depended on people choosing to honor the standards they claimed to represent. The regional director concluded the final conversation with human resources before turning back toward Angela Brooks with quiet respect. Your withdrawal has been fully verified, he said. The funds are available whenever you wish to proceed, and corporate administration has authorized any additional review you request. Angela looked around the private banking lounge one last time before answering. The withdrawal was never the most important transaction taking place here today. Every person within earshot listened carefully. The marble floors reflected the afternoon light exactly as they had when she first arrived, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. Employees who had rushed to conclusions now understood the cost of assumptions. Customers who had entered expecting an ordinary banking visit had witnessed something far more meaningful than a financial dispute. They had watched integrity withstand pressure without surrendering to anger. Angela slowly walked toward Emily Carter, who still stood beside her workstation, holding the printed authorization notice that she had refused to ignore. You trusted the process when it would have been easier to follow the crowd, Angela said. Never underestimate how much courage that takes. Emily smiled modestly. I only believe the facts deserved a chance to speak. Angela nodded. And because of that, they did. The regional director made a note in his folder before speaking again. Ms. Carter, your professionalism will be recognized in our formal review. Emily looked genuinely surprised. She had not expected recognition. She had simply chosen honesty over convenience. The older businessman who had defended Angela throughout the morning walked forward, extended his hand, and said, I have spent decades building companies, and I have learned that character is revealed long before titles are. Today proved that lesson again. Angela shook his hand warmly. Thank you for speaking when silence would have been easier. Around the lounge, several customers quietly expressed similar thoughts before returning to their appointments. Some smiled at Emily. Others thanked the security officers for remaining patient instead of escalating the situation. The branch slowly returned to business, yet no one would remember the day because of interest rates, investment portfolios, or account balances. They would remember it because a simple request for verification exposed something far more valuable than money. Before leaving, Angela turned once more toward the employees gathered near the reception area. Her voice remained calm, measured, and unmistakably sincere. Every person who walks through these doors brings a story you cannot see. Some are building their first savings account. Some are protecting a lifetime of work. Some own companies. Some are struggling to pay bills. Your responsibility is never to guess who deserves respect. Your responsibility is to give it before you know anything else. The words settled over the room with quiet finality. No applause followed immediately because none was needed. The lesson had already reached every person present. Angela collected her leather portfolio and accepted the completed transaction documents without ceremony. As she walked toward the exit, the automatic doors opened, welcoming her into the bright Carolina afternoon. She paused for only a moment, looking back at the building that now belonged to more than financial records and polished architecture. It belonged to a standard that had been tested and, for some, rediscovered. Then she smiled gently and spoke the final words that remained with everyone long after she had gone. I never raised my voice today. I only raised the standard. Real leadership is not about proving who belongs in the room. It is about making sure every person who enters that room is treated with fairness before judgment, with dignity before assumptions, and with respect before appearances. That is the only investment that will always grow.